you're in the right place. Dr. Kris Wusterhausen has been in your shoes, and he's done the work and can show you how you can turn things around. In this podcast, he'll share his personal stories and advice on how to create the life you want for yourself as a provider and as a business person. You'll learn how to reclaim your life, your time, your energy, and most of all, reclaim the dream you had when you started your journey to become a doctor. Welcome to the Dr. Kris Podcast. All right, welcome back to Dr. Kris Life Conversations with Dr. Kris. How are you, Dr. Kris?
I'm great. Thank you for asking. Hope all is well.
Yeah, I'm, as we're developing out this series here, I've been enjoying these conversations because, we're on a journey. You think about everyone that kind of wakes up and they've wrestled with this conversation in the back of their mind. You need to do something about your health. You're not getting any younger. We have all these messages coming to us, and yet we push it off and we push it off. But then when you think about in your professional life, that happens as well. And we were talking last time about your journey into this proactive medicine world where you're helping clients who want to take ownership to learn about other options that improves their situation, their energy, their health, or the way they're feeling. But also you're helping doctors achieve this. I'm curious about, when I think about a change that I'm going to do, I like to let's figure out 3 things that aren't like these big drastic changes. But if I can start getting some wins in these 3 little areas, they'll make a big difference over time. And it's that way in our professional life as well. So tell us, what are the 3 things that you started to address when you realized the situation I'm in this practice as a provider, insurance first, is not where I want to be? You started to make some changes. You didn't make this big change. You made little changes. So I'd love to know what those 3 changes were.
Yeah, and probably I'll kind of talk about what I did and maybe what I would recommend, because there were some failures along the way, of course. But I think the first thing is figure out what you love. Fall in love with something with your job. If I had one of my own criticisms about myself when we did make the changes, we over a couple of years started doing too many things and really kind of got out there into some things that help the patients, but maybe it wasn't my passion or my love. And I think the first thing is go get education and fall in love with something. Figure out what it is that you want to do with your patients, because this can be a very specialized field of medicine. So like we talked about, I think last episode, some of the different educational entities that you can use, AMMG, A4M. Of course, I'm a faculty member and I love SSRP, which is all about peptides and hormones and healthy living. But start getting involved in these organizations. Maybe go to a little bit of everything, spend a little bit of money on this and figure out what it is that maybe you really want to do. Maybe you already know, but I have a feeling you don't, because until you go out and really learn some of these new ways of doing things, you can really, I think with time, find what your passion can be for the rest of your career. So I think that's the first thing any provider, before they're going to try to make the change, you got to get the knowledge. Go out there, get the knowledge, find out what it is that you like, dislike, and maybe do that for a year or 2 and really get that background. And then, so for me, I started that with my own, I think, we've talked about it, my own health journey. And I realized I just didn't have the education that I needed to help myself. My colleagues didn't seem to know what to do to help myself for gaining weight. And even though I worked out and just all my lab parameters were headed in the wrong direction. So that's what caused me to find Synergenics at that time. And that was, and they still do education as well. Really, it's AMMG now. But so I started my journey as a patient / provider with Synergenics, and went down that path and then fell in love with it, worked for them part-time for like a year. And that's kind of how my transition started. But I realized that I liked a few things and disliked a lot of things about their model. So then it was up to me to pick a business model. How do I want this to work? And probably that's the biggest question that I run into with providers, because most of the providers that I run to are already going to educations that are related to functional medicine, because that's where I meet them usually, or conferences. And they always have the same general questions, how do I make the switch? What are some of my options? And, so you're going to have to sit down at some point and find the business model that works for you. Obviously, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So you got to do what feels right to the provider. And then really think about it, talk to other providers, figure out what works for you. And then I think the biggest thing for us, we started our own side business. And so we ran, I was full time at one place and trying to carve out a half a day here, a half a day there to make this other practice work, which probably wasn't the best way to do it. I probably should have made a faster transition. But I think that's where, if you sit down and set a timeline, some financial goals, maybe even as your provider starting to set some revenue to the side, because realizing that my first few months in business, I'm not going to probably make money. I'm probably going to lose money. If you're lucky enough to break even, that's awesome. But, you probably have to look at the reality that there's going to be a few lean months, and how do you survive? And what do I have to exist? That's one of those things that can be really tough, because none of us like to take financial step backs in our life. So really setting a timeline, some goals, and I think then just executing it. So it's getting the education, setting the business model, and really and truly getting a timeline and just really sticking to it. I think are some of the biggest factors that we tried to do. So we picked our business model. We started a practice. The thing that for us was our first year, in our first 5 years, our first year was our best year. The next 4 were actually worse, but it was, I forget the years, but we started right when the economy was great. And then we had that setback, and it really, affected our community. We got too diverse. We started trying to do, when you see something, take a step back, we'll do more procedures. We'll do more things. That's a worst idea. Then you do a bunch of things half-ass, in my opinion. That's why we've been really focusing over the last couple of years of reining in and really focusing on what I like to do and what I like to study and what we can be good at. So, but that would be my basic guidance to a provider, who wants to start looking into this field.
Well, before we talk about kind of personally the 3 changes you made, when you say business models, in my mind it pops up, I wonder what those business models are. Do you have like a classification, a rough?
Yeah, there's just different ways you can do this. And it really depends on the practice. Like you can have a subscription model, and we kind of do a hybrid in our clinic. There are some practices that you cannot literally there's no service you can get in their office unless you're a member of the practice. And I think that can be a really good way to go. Subscriptions are something that makes it feel exclusive. It keeps your patients engaged, because if I'm going to pay something on a monthly basis, I'm more likely to utilize it. Although they still have the potential to become gym memberships, but usually the cost is high enough that you keep people engaged. So that's probably the most popular model currently is 100% subscription models. Then you can just have pure cash for fee services. So, this is how much I charge for blank, and you come in and I charge you, some doctors do it per hour. Like I charge 500. I'm just throwing a number out, $500 an hour. You took 30 minutes. So it's $250, kind of like a lawyer does. Except most doctors don't round up, just, 30-minute increments. And then there's some models, well, like ours is a hybrid. So we still have some services that are fee for service, and we have certain that are subscription. If I was starting today, I would go subscription only. That's a hard transition to make once you're in the middle of it, because you have some patients that aren't used to that. And then you have some that try to do the insurance and the cash pay practice and coexisting in one office. Those are tricky. And I am not a lawyer, and I'll put that disclaimer out there. Talk to your lawyer about it, because if you're taking insurance, specifically Medicare or Medicaid, you have to be very careful in that model, because you're not allowed to charge Medicare, Medicaid patients anything cash if you're accepting Medicare and Medicaid monies. So from my understanding, there's some ways to make that legal. They get kind of hairy, but if it's a practice that, so like for us, we completely opened a separate practice across town, kept those entities very, very separate, different company, everything. So really though, most commonly today, if you're going to do cash, it's hard to exist with insurance and cash in the same office. It gets very confusing. Well, you took my insurance for this, but why don't you take my insurance for that? So patients can get very confused by that. I kind of think you need to rip the Band-Aid off if you're going to do it. Are you a cash pay practice, or are you an insurance-based practice? So then typically it comes down to that subscription model. And then it gets into, what do I charge? Well, I always say it's kind of like Cowboy Stadium down the road. I used to be a season ticket holder, and I bitched every year about the price. But yet every time I showed up, I'm like, oh, Jerry Jones charges too much. No, he doesn't. The place is full every single game. If you fill it up, you're not charging too much. So you have to charge what you feel is appropriate for your time and effort, but while also making sure that you don't exclude the patients that you don't want excluded. And that's, as a physician or as a provider, that's the biggest hurdle, because we want to help and we don't want to exclude people, but then there's a certain amount of money you have to make to keep your doors open. And so that's why I recommend my docs. And I think this would be a good topic real quick. It's good to have people involved in your practice that aren't as emotionally tied to your practice as you are, that help you set price points, that can literally look at things, bean counters. They can literally look at things and say, doc, do you realize this service cost you this? So in order to keep this place going and for you to make this salary, you've got to charge this or have this many patients. And, in the beginning, I just pretty much set my own prices, and we're probably still too inexpensive, to be honest with you. It's something, that's why opening a new practice, we can kind of reset prices. So I think it's really important that you have that consultant or person in your practice that's not so emotionally tied to things. And then, if you feel like, oh my gosh, that price, it's too high, I'm cutting out these patients, some of the different creative things I can do is you can say, what, per month, I'm going to set the number, 3 patients, and I'm only going to charge them this. I'm kind of scholarshiping them in, because I know that they need my help. They can't afford my help, but set that number and stick to that number. I'm just throwing out 3, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 1, I don't know, but set a number and then let your staff maybe help choose who are the candidates for that number. One of the doctors that I train with, and I thought this was a really good one, she'll trade out services for community service. So literally she'll say she has and she does so many, like obviously not everybody does this, but she'll say, okay, this service costs $500. That's 5 hours of community service. And she'll even take like mowing your neighbor's yard and things like that. And she'll have them bring in a log. Of course, it's on good faith that they're actually doing what they say. And I thought that was a really creative, cool thing to do as well. So we're on the verge of starting a little scholarship program and things like that as well. So it's a little bit of giving back to kind of make the physician feel like, that they're still doing their part. But as I tell doctors, they really struggle with charging patients cash. And I always go, how much did this conference cost you that you're at right now? Oh, okay. Well, the price to get in was $3,000. The airfare was $800. The room was $400 a night for 3 nights. And I'm like, you're really hitting about $10,000 just to be at this conference right now. But yet you're fretting, you have to be able to recoup this. Your time is worth something. The other thing that I find that providers struggle with is, like with subscription models, is like, well, Steve is easy. Steve, doesn't take too much of my time, but Bob, he takes like 3 times the amount of time. Well, first of all, one of the business managers that we deal with, he said, Your local movie theater doesn't charge more or less if you're going to go see a Mel Gibson 3 hour epic versus a 90-minute Disney movie. There's a price of admission, and that is what it is. And then from there, the patients utilize those services as they choose to utilize them. Just like I'm sure you have customers that maybe underutilize you, and you have some that maybe overutilize you. Most people find it kind of fall in the middle. And we feel like at the end of the day, everybody kind of averages out, that it all comes out to the same. But those are just some different ways of looking at the different models that are out there.
Excellent. So education, kind of picking a model, and then what was the other one?
Timeline, and
Yeah.
actually, pre-planning like a year or two in advance, because putting some revenue aside so that you have some money to exist on, so that you don't feel this pressure of, oh my God, my first month we lost $10,000, because you're going to lose money most likely unless you're just really lucky and you're in a great spot. Great. Like we're opening in Nashville soon, and I just hope by 90 days we're breaking even. I mean, that's my goal. But that's okay. That's what new businesses do. You can't expect to open your doors and make money. And if it does, that's great. But just set some timelines, set some goals that you feel are realistic, that you're okay with, so that you can look back at and go, because when you'll look at finances, financial, oh man, but then you go like, oh hell, that's actually better than what I projected, like, oh, okay, let's quit beating ourselves up over this. And it gets really easy as a provider, and as you get more into business, to start beating yourself up like, oh, we should have done better here or better there. That's why I just really think writing goals down. And I don't know, you've probably heard that if you actually write something down and, have it there, you're more likely to achieve it versus just kind of thinking about it for a couple seconds and moving on.
So when I think about my personal journey, there's a similar pattern. It's, I'm watching YouTube videos of people that are promoted, like let's say intermittent fasting was one of the 3 things that I thought I would challenge myself with accepting, because it has such a big impact over your overall health. But I had to start watching videos and kind of educating myself, so that I didn't, whatever was in my head, I called intermittent fasting. But when I started hearing other people talk about it, it changed. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can do that. Or that's an easy win. Or sleep most of that time. There was all these little tips that I picked up, and it made sense.
Or realizing that, oh my God, I didn't realize it's going to do this for me as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it gives you more conviction about why you should stick to it.
Mm-hmm.
So in your personal journey, what were the 3 things that you did?
Yeah, that's easy. So it really started, I know I keep repeating this, but it started with understanding nutrition and fixing my nutrition. At that time, I always tell my patients, what I tell you today, I may tell you something different tomorrow, because intermittent fasting really became a thing here in the last, 2 to 3 years. When I really started this journey 12 years ago, I told people to eat 6 times a day, small meals, and you can have success with that. Don't get me wrong. Now I tell them a totally different thing, but when one of the simplest things I did in my practice, now that I think about it, after I learned nutrition, was I stopped drug rep lunches. I literally, I say I stopped them. I was not, at my old clinic, I was not well liked for a few months because, the staff loves free food. So I told the drug reps, you can bring food in, but here's the only things that you're allowed to bring in. And so I gave them some options. And of course, very quickly, my staff said, can we just stop the lunches? Because nobody liked the fact that it was healthy lunches. Because, you go into a typical doctor's office, you may or may not know this, but at lunchtime, a drug rep brings in Olive Garden, lasagna and salad with tons of dressing and breadsticks, and you cram it in your pie hole and eat about 1,500 horrible calories. Started with a day with a drug rep that brung some donuts from somewhere in, or smoothies from Smoothie King, which is nothing but sugar, and And then heck, once every couple of weeks, they would bring in an ice cream bar in the middle of the afternoon and things like this. I stopped it all. I just said, nope, no more. Because at that time I didn't have, today it would be no problem. I'd have the willpower just to go right by it. At that time, I did not have the willpower. I just didn't. So I would end up eating this crap. And so learning nutrition was really, really important. Learning that I just can't get away it in my mid 30s with eating lasagna for lunch. Not only the nutritional impact of that, but how it made you feel, for the afternoon. So that was the first thing. The second thing was my hormones, fixing my hormones. I mean, that's huge. As I've told you many times, at 34 years of age, I was low testosterone. And so learning how to properly fix that made a huge impact, because I immediately, within 2 weeks, felt better. Energy level was up, and I started to gain that motivation to do better. I started to learn, I started to gain that ability to not eat poorly and to avoid some of those things, get that willpower up, because I was feeling better and I didn't want to stop that momentum. Because my first year that actually my first 6 months, I lost 40 pounds. The first 6 months that I changed my life, I became really obsessive about my diet, so much so that I always tell patients that my wife, Chrysanta, had an intervention with me. She literally brung in a pair, and as you know, and if anybody that doesn't know, my wife is a very small lady. She brung in a pair of her blue jeans and said, see if you can put these on. And I could. And they were size 27 waist. And when I'm in good shape, I'm a 31, 32. I was 27 and I could buckle them. And she goes, this is ridiculous. Like, you've got to mix in more protein and things like that. So that actually kind of started my second journey of, kind of realizing that muscle is our currency as we age, and learning how to put on muscle, because I quickly learned how to shed fat, but I didn't know how to do it while maintaining muscle. So I became sort of that skinny fat. I do tell patients a lot, you're skinny fat, your weight is great, but your body composition is poor. So then I started that second phase of my journey over the last, many years, since about 35, of adding muscle. So that brings me into my third part, which was learning how to exercise properly, learning that. So I went to the gym regularly, like a lot of 30-something-year-olds did. And I did the same thing every time. I went and I did a little warm up and I jumped on the treadmill, and I would do anywhere from, depending on how much time, 4 to 6 miles on the treadmill. And I would just run my little tail off, what I thought, at the same speed, at the same incline, pretty much every day. I did that for a long period of time. And guess what? After a few months, a year, nothing happened anymore. And I was still gaining weight despite, I run 5 miles a day, 4 or 5 times a week. What the hell? Well, I needed to be resistance training. I needed to be changing up my routines. I need to be mixing in HIIT workouts for cardio, not, running at the same speed. I don't care what you do. If you go in the gym and lift the same amount of weights, the same exercises every day, you will eventually lose progress. It's just like our brain. If we don't test our brain with different things, we'll eventually not learn anything else. And so learning how to eat correctly, which is still an ongoing journey, something that I still struggle with every day, just like everybody else. I would love to eat cheeseburger and fries for every meal, but learning I can't. Really getting my hormones fixed. Actually, that was the easy of the three, in my opinion, just getting the education and know how to do that. But as a patient, having someone that knows how to do that. And then 3, learning how to exercise properly, learning that women especially have to resistance train. And now, when I say resistance train, I always tell my ladies, look, I'm not asking you to go lift the gym. That's not what we're talking about here. But what is resistance training? It's putting the muscles under resistance, some form of resistance to train. It can be bands. But we have to stress the muscles so that we can grow muscle, so that as we age, we have plenty of muscle, so that we don't become what we call sarcopenic, which is the term for loss of muscle mass. So when you look at, you talked about your parents that are in their 80s, right? And I don't know if this is the case, but when you look at them and if they look frail, many times they're sarcopenic. They're osteoporotic, meaning their bones are weak, and sarcopenic means their muscles are not there. So loss of bone, loss of muscle, sarcopenic, osteopenic, they typically go together. That's what makes us frail little old people, especially ladies. They go into their 60s with not enough muscle. So most of us, we can gain muscle fairly easily if we do the right things into our 50s, sometimes into our 60s. But as we start hitting 60s, for most of us, there's always that aberration. It becomes really hard to add muscle at some point in our life, typically in our 60s. So then we go on this downward trajectory. But if we resistance train, if we eat proper protein, if we maybe do peptides and hormones, we can slow that trajectory down very much so. And that's how you have these 80 something year old guys who are out swinging a golf club and looking great and, still running circles around 60-year-olds. Like, how the hell did he do that? It's not by accident. I mean, he may have got it right by accident, but it's not by accident. I guarantee you they got plenty of muscle. They live a healthy lifestyle. There's always that guy, but there's not that many of them that do everything wrong and still turns out right. Most of them, it doesn't turn out well for them.
So, we have to change our identity, the way we see ourselves, in order to go a different direction. So the education, going to the conferences, consuming things that are educational, and change the way that we can have a different expectation of where we're going with our health and where we're going professionally. So if a physician is listening and is like to connect with you, you would be able to direct them or do some introductions as far as people they should connect with or organizations, right?
Yeah, we can do lots of different things. If it's somebody that just wants to, an ear to listen to them for a few minutes and maybe give them a few pointers. I'm never going to charge for that kind of stuff. And I'm more than happy to listen or just respond by emails or whatever they're comfortable with. Maybe point them in the direction of, what are you thinking? What is it? What is it you're wanting maybe to do with your life, with your career, and maybe just give them some advice. And I always just try to tell providers, I'm just trying to help other providers avoid the pitfalls that we wish someone would have helped us avoid. I could probably be a couple years further down the road if I'd have known these things, but you know what, when you don't know, you got to learn them somehow. So yeah, I mean, we'd be more than happy. They're welcome to email me anytime. That's a great way to start, which is just Dr. Kris with a K at theresearchclinic.com. And that's kind of what I do for some of the different entities that I work with, is just maybe being a mentor might be the term I might use, just mentoring them. And then, if there's a provider that actually wants more help than that, we can always work something out there too financially that wouldn't be crazy, that we could help mentor them, further. But I'm more than happy to share the knowledge. Like I said, I really enjoy hearing success stories from other providers.
Then, a lot of providers could use a physician or a provider that could help them dial in their hormones, dial in these other things as well. You do that as well.
Yeah, we've actually had a little influx. They kind of seem to go in waves. We have an influx of physicians lately coming in to see us. And because we're launching some different programs that we've been working on, and we're having some really good success, and the word's getting around, and other doctors are telling other doctors, and it's really neat. I was actually just talking to one of my other nurse practitioners, Karen, this morning about how awesome it is when you sit down with a doctor and, talk with them for about 60 minutes. And they don't usually tell me, but one of my other doctor buddies texted me, doctor saw a doctor, and he texts me and he goes like, man, he was so impressed. He said that you gave him more knowledge in 60 minutes than he's heard in a long time. And that's just really great to hear that, that a physician walks away from it going, that was worth 60 minutes of my time. Because I like helping everyone, but I really get a kick out of helping other physicians change their lives too. Just like, these doctors that have been my mentors have helped me over time with my business, but also my health. I mean, my health is really important. And I'm really happy with where we're going. And, it's always fulfilling to do that.
I think it's excellent because you're building a community of physicians that want to do better by their patients. That it was innate in them probably when they started. that was like really important to them. And over time, they've been ground down by the environment, the insurance companies, and it's like it's still latent in them. They still want to do that, and that's, you're building a community of folks that are doing it, and naturally they would want to do their health and have that same mindset, that same energy towards their health as well.
And I guess there's always a positive too when you see like providers as patients, and you don't, some of these providers, I don't know at all. They just heard about me through other providers, and they walk away and I'm like, oh, cool. He didn't think I was crazy. Because sometimes what we recommend is just not in their wheelhouse. It's not fitting the traditional protocol of medicine. But then again, I always tell myself there's a reason they're here. They've already been told I'm not doing it the same way as everybody else. And they obviously want to hear what I have to say. And obviously the traditional way of doing things is what's got them in the shape that they're in. So, it's just always kind of nice when an actual provider walks away and is like, okay, yeah, that was cool. That I can see where you're coming from there, because it's the what do they call it? The aha moment. I've had it twice in my career since I've been doing this. And the first one was hormones. It was like, oh, okay, we can replace these things. And oh, okay, this is how we do it. And wow, if we just replace somebody's hormones and do it properly, like the body functions normally again. Okay, aha, I get it. And then the second one, and that was really who led that charge for me, was Dr. Thompson with Synergenics, who's still a very close doctor to me. And we still work together. And then it was again finding Bill Seeds, and that's when it came to cellular medicine. And that's been my big second huge aha moment is oh, if we just make the cells work better, the body works better. And that's kind of even a more simplistic than the hormones. It's actually kind of stepping back a little bit, even more simplistic than hormones. Okay, just make the body function correctly and, make the cells function, and then everybody does good down the road. So, that's why I just think the educational side of it, finding what fits your personality. What do you like? I mean, you may not like cellular medicine. That's too out there for me, but I can do hormones or whatever, you just need to love what you do. And if you don't love it, don't do it.
Well, your wife had this really, really good testimony of how the hormones really changed her. And I'm just thinking while you're talking that maybe on our next conversation, we can talk about hormones specifically and what the advantage is for you, but also what the advantage is for your practice. Because when I think about what's the one little thing that you could start doing, probably most providers, they're busy working on everyone else. They may not know that hormones could be a big upgrade.
It's probably the easiest thing that you can get education on and you can implement into your practice and do it right. And even though hormone replacement is exploded across America, it's still underserved for the most part across the nation. And it's something that patients will see success from. They'll be happy with the service you provide. And there's doctors out there that do nothing but hormone replacement, financially do great. Their patients are happy and satisfied, and you go home at night and your phone isn't ringing off the hook with on call and things like that. So it can be a great way of life. And patients and a lot of providers tell me, I just want to do hormone replacement. I'm like, that's awesome. You can make an absolute career out of that. No doubt about it. And so, yeah, we could absolutely talk about the pros and cons for the patient and the providers with that for sure.
Let's do that. That'll give you a little time. You can have a little, maybe some great topics to cover and get a little bit deep there. That would be good.
Cool. Sounds great.
All right, Dr. Kris, great conversation. If something here has moved you, inspired you, maybe you want to just ask Dr. Kris a question, you can reach out to Dr. Kris at the Research Clinic or Dr. Kris with a K at theresearchclinic.com, right?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
All right. Well, great conversation, Dr. Kris. You have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll connect next week.
All righty. Sounds good.
All right. And that's a wrap. Thanks for joining the Dr. Kris podcast. If you learned something today and you want to connect and get more information, visit our website, www.drkris.life, where you can find more great information or even schedule a time to learn how you can engage with Dr. Kris. Be sure to follow, like, share, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Dr. Kris Podcast.